So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're still going to be letting any number of people come in. Maybe they got delayed, but we felt in fairness to all of you who are here now that it's going. So I'm just going to. Hmm, there we go. Okay. So my name is Sally McIntyre. I'm the general manager here at Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority. I'm here with Scott Lawrick, who is the property manager, and he oversees the current museum operations and all of the operations at all of our conservation areas. And Kelly Hollington, who many of you would have contacted to get details for today, and she's providing Zoom and tech support. And then Brittany Moy is providing chat room moderation. So for us, so that we're able to make this Zoom meeting flow as easily as possible. So we are hoping to have the Zoom session and the presentation posted to our website. It says tomorrow. Sometimes YouTube issues prevent us from getting these things up right away. So, but definitely sometime this week we'll be getting a recording of today's session up and posted. And if at any point, you have to leave and your question didn't get answered, if you could note down the email address there at the bottom, and by all means, follow up with an email to us. So just some administrative matters out of the gate. Not sure how many of you are familiar with Zoom, but we just wanted to review some of how we interact with the audience during these kind of Zoom meetings. So if you have a question, and it's a burning question relevant to the slide I'm on, ideally, you can raise your hand. And so you can see in the reactions section where there's that little smiley face, and you can raise your hand and lower your hand as needed. Um, if you're uncomfortable speaking to the larger group, you can also type something in the chat line. So maybe you don't want to interrupt the flow of the presentation, but you don't want to lose the thought. You can put it into the chat, and Brittany will be keeping track of those, because we will be breaking at key points during the presentation today to review materials covered and if there's any questions to that point in time. So again, you can use the chat function. And then both at the beginning and the end of the presentation, we're going to be doing some short polls. And so these polls, Kelly, will pop up on your screen, and you just, complete them as you're comfortable, no obligation. And then I would share the results back to the group. So you can see, for example, one of the first polls we're going to do is who's on the call today, just getting a bit of a background of who's joined today's session. So the key thing is that once you've clicked your button, you have to press submit. And then we typically allow 1 minute, minute and a half, because they're not very complex polls, and then we'll share the results with everybody. So getting into the session then, our objectives for today is really to share information. We've had lots of information requests from many people, not just who are directly tied to the museum, but the broader community, about what we currently do, what the issues are, how we've been addressing them, the future, etc. So we wanted to share information specifically targeting those who have a long-term interest in finding a solution for the museum. Perhaps they're interested in doing fundraising, or they're interested in providing funding, and who are currently or would like to help contribute in some way to the operations or other matter with respect to the museum now or in the future. So we're here to answer whatever questions we're able to. We might not be able to answer all your questions today, in which case we'll be noting them down and doing a follow-up. So at the end of the day, we're walking away with a list of what additional questions the community has that we can go and do research on and hopefully find answers for. So before we go any further, I do want to have Kelly put up the initial poll, just so that we all can see who's on the line today and get an understanding of some of the backgrounds and interests of those of you participating. And Kelly, can everybody see the live results?
Once it's done, I'll share.
Okay, so I'm seeing live results. I'm not sure if all of you are, but we'll share them at once most people have completed. So it looks like we've got roughly a 56% completion rate. So how about we share now the results? So you can see that most people responding or participating today are either from the town of Mississippi Mills or somewhere else in Lanark. And we have folks from outside the region as well as the city of Ottawa. So thank you for that. I think we have another follow-up question, do we?
Watch.
Okay, I don't see any more answers coming in, so we'll end it there and share the poll. So it's interesting to note that many of you are here out of general interest regarding the Mill Kintail and the museum. So that's great, and lovely to see that several of you are also interested in potentially volunteering or are current volunteers. And so thank you very much for completing that. I don't think we had any more polls at this stage, did we, Kelly?
No.
No. Okay, so I'm going to continue on. If you want to, you can close that out on your screen. And let's just see here. There we are. Okay. So some of the topics I'm going to cover today, and along with my colleague Scott, are, well, first of all, going to talk about the transition plan and what that is, why it's needed, etc. And then we're going to go back in time and cover a lot of matters going back in the history of both the site and the collection and the museum, because there's a lot of various thoughts out there in the community about how the MVCA acquired the property, and I think it's just important that we cover that information. Then we're going to get into operations, both historical and current, and the assets, the collections themselves, and some of the work that was recently done by the Canadian Conservation Institute, CCI. And so some of the things that we need to be thinking about going forward with the museum. And then we're going to cover a variety of financial matters so that people have an understanding of the financial situation facing the museum today and in the near years. And then lastly, we'll talk about the working group, which is to work with MVCA on developing, examining, the feasibility of alternatives for somebody else to take over the museum from us. So, getting right into it then. The transition plan was approved by our board, and it maps out the timelines that we need to be thinking about if we're going to be backing out of that kind of management operational role of the museum. And it also provides for what happens if we don't find a feasible solution for retaining the museum at that site. So we're well aware that the community, I'm imagining many of you on the call today, are very much committed to trying to find that solution, and we're with you on that. As a corporation, we of course have to have a plan B, which is what would we do with both the collections and the museum building itself if we're not able to find that feasible solution. And so a lot of this works, the timelines that we're talking about in these different phases of activity is because we need, as I call it, the runway needed to pivot as an organization if we have to. So phase one, which takes us through to late spring, the end of May next year, is the period of time that we're carving out to work with community leaders and the like and experts in the field to figure out whether or not there is a feasible solution for somebody else to take over management and operations of the collection at that site. And then that provides us with sufficient time to figure out the details of how we would implement that before January 1st of 2029, which you see in the bottom right, which is when the transition has to happen by. And I'll get more into the details on that at a subsequent slide. So getting into the history of the site, I imagine many of you know the history of the site, but some of you might not. So the property was developed with a grist mill, which is the mill building is the building that the museum is situated in today, back in 1830. And then roughly 100 years later, R. Tate Mackenzie purchased the land and restored that building as a summer home and studio for himself. And the story goes that him and James Naismith used to visit that site and play in that locale and had a lot of sort of emotional ties to that property. Now, Major Lees purchased the property from R. Tate Mackenzie's widow in 1952. And he and his wife actually were the ones that developed the museum and took many of the possessions that um, uh, that his widow provided to them as part of the property transfer. And interestingly, back in 1957, the NCC actually expanded the boundaries of the National Capital Region to include the property, because at that time it was at least partially starting to support the operation of that site. So in 1958, Ontario erected a plaque marking the mill and the grounds as a historic site. And a few years later, in 63, the Canadian Medical Association and the Canadian Association of Health Professionals, and I forget what the ER stands for, but it'll come to me, recommended that the entire site be made a national shrine. So in the 50s, 60s, there was a real movement afoot to recognize both the significance of R. Tate Mackenzie in the property and his artwork and all that he had contributed to both medical science and public health science and education. MVCA acquired the property from the Lees in 1972, and the mill building itself was designated a heritage building in 1982. So that's a bit of the history of the site and who owned it and the like. Now I'm going to get into some of the details around the actual acquisition of the property from the lease in 71, 72. So this is an excerpt of minutes from a special, advisory board. It was a temporary board that was set up to consider the acquisition of the Lees property. So these are minutes from November 71. And you can see where I've highlighted middle page that the then chair of the authority, Mr. Finley, indicated that the advisory board would operate the mill and that the operations must be self-sustaining. So I think it's really important to understand that there were concerns right out of the gate from all the parties about how this was going to be financially sustainable over time. And that for that reason, and the uncertainty around it, you'll see highlighted down below where it says that the acquisition of the mill clearly states that only the land and buildings are being purchased, and that all of the artifacts in the present museum will be donated as a gift by Major and Mrs. Lees to the authority. So, there's a lot of confusion out there about whether or not we purchase the collection, and if the two are tied together. And I think it's just really important to understand that this was a condition of purchase and sale, that we would not buy the collection, that it would be donated. So we did acquire from Major Lee's 33 acres for $110,000 in 72. And as you can see, MVCA is a very young organization. We were only 4 years old at that time. Did not actually contribute any funds. The funds came from the National Capital Commission, the Department of National Health and Welfare, the Provincial Department of Environment, and Ontario Heritage Foundation, which is a precursor to the current Ontario Heritage Trust. And the collection was gifted. Now, the next year, we bought an adjacent property, 134 acres. So most of the property that we own at the Mill of Kintail today was not from Major Lease. It was from an adjacent landowner. And we had acquired the gatehouse in 1986 and a further 17 acres from the Monet family. And then we did a small severance to allow for property consolidation of adjacent landowner. We sold off 30 acres of farmland, also in 86. So today, as things stand, we own approximately 150 acres, most of which was not tied to the Major Lee's sale of his property. So now we own or display or manage much more than what was acquired from the Lees, through their donation in 1972. But most of the collection was either donated or acquired through official transfer or is on loan from other organizations. So today, the collections, and by now I'm speaking of both the Naismith collection and the Mackenzie collection, is over 5,000 objects, photographs, archives, and library materials. And you can see the various organizations over time who have donated to MVCA with items that they felt would be that they wanted to share with with the museum. So the Naismith collection largely has come much more in more recent history. So back in 2007, MVCA entered into negotiations with the town of Mississippi Mills and the Naismith Foundation to display the collection. And this related to, as I understand it, issues that were happening within the town on space necessary for town or other purposes, and therefore potentially the foundation was going to lose its place where it was currently displaying. So in 2008, MVCA agreed to temporarily house the Naismith collection in the basement of the museum. And over a period of years, you can see up until 2014, it remained as a temporary exhibit under a renewing 5-year memorandum of understanding or of agreement. And we were actually compensated for that at $6,500 a year. And then in 2015, we entered into an agreement, but the town of Mississippi Mills agreed to commit a further $5,600 to support museum operations. We received our last transfer from the foundation of donations in 2016, and officially in 2017, we accepted as owners, managers, the Naismith collection from the foundation. So of the items we have on loan, there are 78 of them, and 18 are on display in the studio. The rest are in storage, either in our archive at the Gatehouse or somewhere else on the property. So you can see where those loaned items come from. Many people are familiar with University of Pennsylvania and McGill, but there's some other organizations as well, and that have donated materials, and as well as several items from private individuals who over time have loaned us items. So I'm going to pause at this point, and if people have any questions or want clarification on material I've covered to date, feel free to either put up your hand or to put a question in the chat line. So I'll just give a minute or so. And are you able to adequately see where people are putting up their hands? Do we have any questions?
No questions, but John commented that it's the Canadian Association for Health, Physical Education and Recreation.
Thank you for that clarification, John. Can people hear you? You're unmuted?
They can hear me.
Okay.
Margaret Jonker wants to know, is James Naismith's Bible in the collection?
I will personally have to look into that. I haven't heard that, but we'll make that note that as a question and get back to you.
Heather would like to know, NCC expanded capital boundaries in 1957 to include the mill. What is the relationship today with the NCC?
So today it's really advisory, I would say. When we were doing work on the roof and the windows and that sort of thing, because they're have heritage on staff, expertise, they have provided advice to us, but there is no financial relationship, and they have no working relationship in terms of the operations of the museum.
And Lucy just answered that yes, the Bible is at the mill.
Okay, so for those who may not have heard that, Lucy Carlton has confirmed the Bible is at the mill. So thank you for that, Lucy. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this over to.
One more
Oh,
question.
one more question. Okay.
Does heritage designation affect any decisions to be made about the artifacts in their housing?
Interesting question. So I'll start the answer to that, and I'll ask Scott to chip in if he wants. So the heritage designation puts constraints on what we can do to the building. And so, and the cost of those changes, right? So it doesn't prohibit us from doing certain improvements, but it can definitely make them a lot more costly. So, for example, that building was never meant to be occupied. And doesn't have proper insulation. It was just used as a summer home. There's no insulation anywhere. And so, but the interior finish of the building is part of its heritage, look and feel and attributes and the like. So to introduce comprehensive climate control in that building, there are definite constraints associated with the heritage designation. So Scott's given me the thumbs up. So by that, I'm taking he has no additions to that comment. So any other questions coming in?
That's all.
Okay, so I'm going to put myself on mute and turn it over to Scott for the next section.
Okay, thanks, Sally. So I'm going to walk everybody through the documentation of collections and some of the operational side of things.
Sorry. There you go.
I lost the view of the presentation.
Oh, you lost the presentation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me do that again in my effort to, there we go. Oops. Okay. And there we go. Now, can you see it?
Yep.
Okay.
You might need to just flip slides for me.
Okay.
Excuse me. So all of our items are cataloged in Past Perfect software, largely accomplished by great efforts from staff and are a big help from our volunteer base. As everybody knows, that your small community museums are definitely relying on volunteers, and we have a great group that works with us. So it's much appreciated. We have good documentation on the items that are received from the Lees group. And then outside of that, there are variable issues on documentation of transfers from other sources and organizations. and signed agreements with terms are fairly limited. So just there's as Sally's already spoken to, the basis of our collection is in front of you there. So just over 5,000 objects, photographs. A major part of them are housed in the collection storage facility in the gatehouse, and then we also list the 303 that are housed in the actual museum. And it kind of lays out how our collection is made up there. I won't walk through every number associated, but it's a fair number of objects that are stored there. So this past year, we were lucky enough to be selected to be part of the Canadian Conservation Institute's program. We applied to be part of the program for them to come in and look at our not only our collection but also the facility that houses the collection. So it was a 2-day process. They came in, and on the first day we went through the collections to do a full kind of report on, what we're doing well, what needs improvement, and the same thing from the facility side of things. The Coles Notes version of the report is there was nothing groundbreaking. Nothing that was really out of place based on the tools that we have to work with to be able to manage the collection and the building itself. I mean, they did speak to a big part of it was the risk of fire that's associated, obviously, with both buildings. So maintaining, vegetative-free zones and robust fire practices. We also looked at conducting feasibility studies for fire suppression systems. So again, as it relates back to the actual buildings, they're obviously being heritage structures. They don't have built-in modern fire suppression systems. So there's different avenues to look at. There's the thought of on-site tanks, which we actually have at our offices, our head offices here in Carleton Place. And also, there are different fire suppression systems that could be installed within the buildings to help mitigate some of those issues. It talks about improving some of the security around the gatehouse, and some security again around the actual museum themselves, in terms of removing some of the cameras that are kind of defunct. It speaks to only really displaying items that are resilient to the dampness. So as we know, within the building, it is subject to the elements. So it's keeping some of those items that are I guess, a little less resilient to the dampness in the climate controlled environment of the archive storage. Also, something that we did preemptive, I guess, to getting this report is we actually relocated the Naismith collection from the basement, where it is a little more subjective to the dampness, up into the main floor, twofold. So to better protect that collection and to also enhance, the views that the Naismith collection is now getting. So now it's located on the main floor as part of, the rest of the main collection there. It also recommended using temperature and humidity data loggers. So we have deployed those just recently. So part of this process is CCI is going to come back next year. They're going to look at the data we've collected. They're going to look at some of the improvements and stuff that we've been able to make based on their report, and we'll kind of have a follow-up visit from them on that. Go to the next slide there. And then again, so it gets into most of the stuff is smaller operational issues. So managing unstable plastic items, it talks about, the plastic and the rubber when it comes to managing how some of those items are stored. It talks about keeping basketballs not fully inflated, but also not fully deflated to remove some of the creases and stuff that can happen in some of these artifacts. We do have once in a while, we'll get birds that come in through the chimney. So kind of mitigating that in the similar monitoring and documenting rodent activity within the building. Again, the building isn't completely sealed up as well as a modern day home would be. So there are some of those holes. It does talk about mitigating exposure to light and UV and what we can possibly do there. Again, enhancing some of the security systems around it, and whether we go to motion activated lights and stuff like that in the exterior. Talks about documenting uranium objects. So some of the uranium objects are on display as the glassware that is from the period of the 1830s and the 1940s, and it's on display as part of the museum. So there are some questions that revolve around some of those objects. Continuing to enhance the storage system in the archive. So we have done a fair amount of work leading up to now to get, some of those items off of the ground in case, there is some sort of groundwater intrusion. Installing proper systems to be able to mitigate some of that groundwater and get it out of there if it does leak in. So, and then another one is keeping emergency response plans up to date so everybody knows, what their responsibilities are in a situation like that. So again, a continuing summary of operations. The slide here does speak to when Major Lee's was operating the museum, and the specific quote, it talks about 1963, where essentially it was up to himself and his wife to be able to manage that entire museum. And they were almost in a similar boat to where we are now, where they're looking for a permanent authority to guarantee the presentation of the museum. Similarly, they go on to talk about what it costs essentially to run a museum back in 1972. Although numbers have changed, the situation hasn't really changed. So they're talking about the resource manager suggested the museum could operate on $1 to $1.50 per car rate. And Major Lee's was, I guess, relaying his sentiments that he's already getting pushback on a 25-cent charge, which we've seen in the history of the museum, where if we start to charge specific rates to get into specifically view the museum, that's when viewership tends to drop. So similar situation to what we were facing, 50 years ago. So our summary of operations from this past year, open Victoria Day weekend to the end of Thanksgiving weekend, open 7 days a week, 10 to 4. So site access is based on $7 a day and that site access fee that also includes access to the conservation area itself. So the actual entry fee to the museum is free, but we did go on a suggested donation as an entry, and this year we were able to yield approximately $5,000 in donations, which is we were pretty happy with that amount for this year. So we have a seasonal curator, which operates for approximately 30 weeks, and this year we had 2 seasonal guides for a 24-week period. And then outside of our normal season, the only real access that the public would have to the museum is during Kintail Country Christmas, where we open kind of the main floor as a backdrop for some Santa photos. It also gets people some access to the museum that might not otherwise get their eyes on it. And it has turned into a good marketing opportunity for the people that have visited during the winter, have never been, and then have said that they can't wait to come back in the summer to see the full thing. So it's something that's turned into a good opportunity. So in terms of space at the gatehouse, the archive's in the basement. It has around 1,000 square foot space where there's shelving and various archival storage materials. A lot of it was funded through grants, and we were able to make some updates to that with the help of our volunteers from our museum group, but also the Naismith Men's Shed, who is a tenant that they like to spend some time not only the conservation area, but out helping with the museum as part of what their group does. So they've been a big help in helping to update some of our storage facilities and some of the shelving there. So on the upper floor of the stone portion of the gatehouse, there's an office approximately 150 square feet where there's some books and computers in there. The main floor also has some computer and scanning equipment. We have relocated a big chunk of that again up into the office when we had the revitalization of our education program this year. So a lot of that is back up in the office space upstairs now. So with that, we'll take any questions based on any of the information that I pass along, or anything that you might have questions about that I might not have covered.
Okay, can you unmute me? Oh, I got it. Very good. Okay, so no questions came in on the chat and we,
Sorry.
oh wait, we just got one. Okay, go ahead.
Catherine wants to know, in the past, the curator was a year-round position. How have operations changed now since it's seasonal?
So operations of the museum haven't really changed significantly. Operations of the property for MVCA have changed. So we've adapted to that. But in terms of museum operations, obviously, we need to have a curator for certain functions, but we brought that person in early enough this year that we were able to successfully meet all our requirements under that shorter period. Any other questions? No. Okay, so now I'm going to start to get into some of the financial matters, and I think it's important that we start by addressing these Category 3 agreements. And sorry if it sounds, a bit it's not technical, but it's a pedantic kind of language. So this is a term that was it's in our legislation, the Conservation Authorities Act. So everything that conservation authorities have to do, that we're mandated and must do, is called Category 1. If we're doing it because a municipality needs us to do it because maybe they're obligated under legislation to do it, then it's a Category 2. And if it's something that we're doing because the community and the board decide this is a good thing that they want us to do, then it's classified as Category 3. So we had to put in place agreements with all of our member municipalities by the end of 2023. They took effect January 1 of 24. That if any portion of their municipal levy was going to continue to cover a Category 3 program, then we needed to have these agreements in place and we needed to be very clear how much they were going to cost. So the agreements that MVCA entered into with our 11 municipalities state that the municipality will agree to continue to fund our Category 3 programs up to 8% of our operating levy, 2% of our capital levy. And it's important to recognize, though, that that's for all of our Category 3 programs, the sum of them. So it's not just the museum, but it's also our stewardship program where we work with community groups to do tree planting, shoreline planting, restorations of wetlands, as well as our education and outreach program where we have, summer camps and school groups onto the site and that sort of thing. So the 8% needs to cover more than just the museum. And last year, when we had to fulfill another provincial requirement, we received direction from the board that all of our Category 3, we needed to work over time to get them off of the levy. So if it was 8% in the agreement, we needed to work at getting that down such that by the end of 2028, hopefully everything is full cost recovery and those costs are not being borne by the municipalities. So we have made a fair amount of capital investments in it since we were made aware of these changes coming down the pipe. So in 2022, we replaced the machine used at the parking lot at the front of to collect site fees because site fees are quite important both to the operation of the property at VCA, but also the operation of the museum. We replaced the shingles in the eaves troughs at the museum. And last year we did repointing of the stonework at both the museum and the gatehouse, and we replaced all the heritage windows at the gatehouse. So, in recent years, we've definitely spent over $100,000. These are the main ones, but there were other ones as well on making sure that the building, both the gatehouse and the museum, are in good condition. Now, since 2020, we have received grants to help offset those costs. But you will see that while the municipal amount has been indexed over time, that the provincial grant hasn't been indexed. So we did receive an additional 3,000 in 2021, and that was a grant to support our digitization of our collection. But other than that, it's been 13,450 for some time, 45, pardon me, for some time, and indications are that that won't change in 2026. So the total amount of grants that generally we can count on getting is in the order today of around 28,500. So this is just an insight into our year-to-date operating costs up till the end of October. So this includes all the summer seasonal staff that we had. So the user fees, these are those site fees that we collect at the parking lot up at the top of the drive. And we have allocated 65% of those site fees during the season that the museum's open. We're assuming that 65% of the people coming to the site are coming to see the museum, and that the balance are there just to visit the site or for some other activity. Outside of the museum operating season, it's 100% for site operations. So we did enhance the gift shop operations this year. We changed out some items and experimented with some things, and it did yield good results. So we got just under 1,300 in revenues from that. Similar to how we divvied up the user fees that people pay at the parking lot, we also have donation boxes around the site. So the one that's in the museum property proper, obviously 100% of those donations are attributed to this. But from the other donations around the site, we assumed 65% of those boxes during the museum operating season, those donations. So you can see it's just over 5,200 in donations we got. And added to this as well would be any donations we receive online, Canada Helps, and that sort of thing. So this is all forms of donations that come into the organization. So you see there the two grants that I covered previously. So total revenues year to date by the end of October were just over 41,000, pardon me, dollars. So when you look below at our expenses, you see it's quite a bit different, and there is a $46,000 difference, and that is being picked up today by the municipal levy I spoke about. So those agreements that say, up to 8% of the municipal operating levy would be picked up by the municipalities under those agreements. So this is the amount we're asking municipalities across, from Ottawa up to Addington Highlands to pay the difference. So I won't go through this in detail. What I will say, however, because it comes up on a subsequent slide, that utilities and insurance and taxes, we have been working this past year to really refine the allocations of costs, because of course we have all sorts of those costs at the site just for normal operations. And so one of the concerns is that we're teasing out just the cost for the museum and being fair, in terms of representing what the costs are just for the museum. So based upon, our analysis, those are the actual real utility costs and insurance and tax costs associated with operating the museum. So now I'm just putting up something that was just released on Friday, and this is our draft 2026 budget. So you can see that I'm not sure about that number there, but I'll come back up to here. The approved budget in 2025 and the proposed draft budget for 2026. And these items, these rows to the right, show you where the money's coming from. So it's anticipated that, in the order of $60,000 is being covered by that municipal levy agreement. 13,000 or so from the province, fees for service. This gets to parking expenses and the like, and then other revenue from the town, etc. for a total revenue of 102. The one thing I wanted to point out here was that this is the first year we're breaking out visitor services. So having people rent the gatehouse, or, hosting weddings and that sort of thing from the museum operations. So if you just look at the museum operations, we're seeing it go up from roughly 92,000 in 2025. We're expecting it to go up to approximately 102 in 2026. So, and the differences you're seeing in the operating expenses is that finessing of those utility insurance tax costs, where we're really looking at specific elements of the spreadsheets we receive, for instance, from the insurer on the insurance for the collection and that specific building. So breaking it out into a bit more detail, you'll be able to see. So utilities and insurance go up quite a bit when we do that teasing out of where the costs are actually being incurred at that site. So between 25 and 26, that's how it's affecting those cost estimates. We're also putting in additional monies for repair and maintenance, upping some additional costs because we're having a difficult time managing within the budget that we had allocated this past year. But some of that as well is to invest in things for the gift shop that then we can turn around and get revenues from. The wages are projected to go down a bit because we are looking to reduce from the current 7 days a week opening to something less than that. Oops, pardon me. Let me go back to this. So now looking at the revenue side of things, the one thing I wanted to point out is we are assuming we're not getting a federal grant for a student again. We did reach out to both the local MP and MPP, and there was no indication that any additional funds would be coming to us in the coming year for either upping the provincial grant that we get every year or for getting funding for a student. You'll also note that the revenues drop from the user fees because we are now very clearly splitting out that 65% I mentioned. 65% of the site fees, during the season that the museum is open. So we had been allowing a lot more of that amount and just putting all of it to the museum. But in fairness, going forward, that wouldn't be the case. So we wanted to represent more accurately what portion would be going to the museum. And we do see the investments made up here in materials and supplies helping us to increase our gift shop sales. And we've already, as we stated earlier, been in around the $5,000 mark for donations to date. So we're hopeful to see that going forward into next year. The last thing I wanted to touch on regarding money matters is the R. Tate McKenzie Memorial Trust. So this was set up in the early 70s, shortly after MVCA acquired the museum, and with the purpose of it supporting the operation of both the new conservation area as well as the museum. And it is still on the books today, though it hasn't been active as a specific trust for many years. So our board of directors is still the board of the trust, and it does retain its federal charitable status. So we have been in discussions with both the town as well as members of our museum advisory committee about the potential opportunity of transferring that trust to somebody else to manage the fundraising. It's not that we haven't been doing fundraising, but we've been doing it under the umbrella of MVCA. Because we have a foundation that was established in the 90s and sort of consolidated all that fundraising work in one foundation. So it's just something to be aware of, and we're continuing to have those kind of conversations. There is no money in the trust. The money was transferred out of and into MVCA's accounts for operation of the museum and have long since been expended. There was and that transfer, occurred we suspect the last transfers occurred in the 90s when that overall corporate foundation was established. So I'll pause here, and again, happy to answer any questions I can. So if people want to put their hands up or put something in the chat line.
I have a couple.
Mhm.
Which provincial ministry provides the grant that was mentioned?
So I'm not going to say it properly, but it's culture and sports.
Community Museums, Ontario, it's Community Museums Operational Grant by the province.
Yes, they're asking which ministry. So
Oh,
that's the name of the grant.
yeah. Okay.
Do we have it handy? I'm pretty sure it's something along the,
Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport.
there you go. Tourism, culture, and sport.
Does the Kintail Country Christmas make money? Where are the expenses budgeted?
So those are covered under, so it's not associated with the museum, number one. It's part of our operating budget for the site proper. And if it does it make money? No. Does it lose that money? Not really. I mean, we're talking just a few $100s. We're not talking thousands of dollars here in terms of net expenses over costs, but it is part of our just general operating budget. And quite candidly, it couldn't operate as an event without hours and hours of volunteer time. So it's more designed as a community event and to encourage people to come out to the site if they've never been there and to become familiar with our property and the museum and all that goes on there.
Which grants are applied for towards seasonal staff and students? Have you considered applying for the Museum Assistance Program?
So we definitely apply every year to the Federal Canada Student Summer Jobs Program. I can't answer specifically if we've ever applied to the other grant, but we can look into that and just see what success rate we've had with that in the past. And we're noting these down, right? We're not going to lose these chat questions? Okay. All right. Carry on.
Tiffany understood that Kintail Country Christmas was planned and coordinated by the museum curator along with the volunteers.
Historically, yes, but it was always done with other staff here at the Conservation Authority. And in fact, it's a much bigger team of people who help to make it happen today, just to make sure it's the event that we want it to be.
Okay, and if the museum is not running in the buildings as it is now, the insurance and taxes still need to be paid. So even without the museum, these costs need to be paid by the MPCA.
So, so let's look at a couple of scenarios. If the building was empty, yes, whether it's empty or full of something, always. So our taxes are universal truth, and the insurance would definitely be a variable. But the collection itself is worth considerable amount of money, and it definitely has a high insurance cost. Any other questions?
That was it for now.
Okay. Super. So we're entering into the last bit of the presentation, and this has to do with the working group. So per that terms of reference, and I spoke to the next, period of time up to the end of May, is going to be this working group coming together and looking to determine, is there a financially sustainable business case for another organization to assume one or both of the collections and to pardon me, operate at that location or potentially another site if that's not feasible. To document the assumptions around those business cases and the analysis that they've carried out, because at the end of the day, the findings of this working group need to come to the board, and the board needs to see clearly what the evidence is in support of what's being recommended. If there is a scenario for keeping the collections at the site, then we're going to need to see some level of commitment from those partners, because in the past we've operated on, I'll just say, good faith, and I think at this point, the board needs to see real documented evidence that people are coming to the table and have the backing and the capability to do what they're saying they're going to do. So that will also have to be documented by the working group. And with the goal is that by no later than May 30th, the board is in a position to have this material, consider it, and be able to go out to the public as well and say, here's what we've heard, here's what we're thinking, and here's how we're contemplating moving forward. And I think we're all hopeful around the table that a successful scenario is developed that has the meat and potatoes that's needed to demonstrate to the level needed by our board of directors to have confidence to move in that direction. So the working group membership, these were the organizations that were invited to participate. So you can see a large number of folks have already agreed to participate. We're still waiting to hear from some, and 2 organizations have issued, that they've declined to participate. It's not necessarily from lack of interest. The PhD Canada alumni, they're still very interested, but they don't think they would have anything meaningful to contribute. And I believe the response from the NCC is they just don't have the personnel and bandwidth to contribute in a meaningful way to the working group. So we have followed up with the Lees family and Ontario Heritage Trust. So we're hopeful to hear from them in the near term. And the Kintail Museum Advisory Committee, we're meeting with them shortly. And at that meeting, we're hopeful that they'll be able to nominate someone from within the group to sit on the working group. So these are the base assumptions that were approved by the board for this working group moving forward, that we are looking at third-party ownership of the collection, such that, we are basically taking the collection that we currently own and giving it over to somebody else. That new owner would be leasing the building, the grist mill, the adjacent lawns to the east, and at least a portion of the gatehouse, at minimum, the archive. That any areas outside of that would be subject to the same sort of site rental fees that we charge anybody else using that property. MVCA generates revenues from hosting events at that site, including weddings, etc. So if whoever takes over the collection at that site wanted to use other portions of the site, then that would have to be either part of the lease agreement or subject to rental fees. That a portion of the capital renewal costs need to be factored into the lease. So you would have noted earlier in the deck, the municipalities today contribute, up to a maximum of 2% of our capital towards the renewal of those buildings on that property. But as noted, those are heritage structures. And for example, the cost to install the windows at the gatehouse, I'm looking at Scott, were they roughly double what they might have been if they were not? Yeah, so roughly double, because they needed to be, meet the heritage requirements of that structure. And it's not that we begrudge that, it's just a fact of the capital renewal of those buildings at that site. And then, but we're also, potentially as joint occupants of that site would be interested in looking at sharing promotional costs, sharing the gate fees, as I've already outlined, but also potential tenant revenues. So if the museum is generating revenues, if we're going to share our gate fees, then the presumption would be potentially that organization would also be sharing its revenues for its special events, etc. So the last assumption is that a lease agreement under our legislation, the CA Act, if it exceeds 5 years, it has to receive ministerial approval. So it's just, we need to always understand that CAs are creatures of provincial government. We have to adhere to the CA Act, and this requirement means that whoever we enter into an agreement with, if there's a desire to have more than a longer lease than 5 years, it has to receive ministerial approval. So that's it on the working group. So again, happy to answer any questions people have on that. And again, if you want to raise your hands, if nope, nothing coming in. Okay, so we're coming down the home stretch, folks, and I really appreciate your patience in this. Oh, wait, we got a question.
What are the potential impacts of proposed merging of the conservation areas?
I don't know. I like, that's the candid truth. I think there's so many unknowns around this potential merger. And in particular, the governance structure and the funding that I honestly, I have no idea. The only comment I would offer is that it just adds additional uncertainty to this whole situation. And for that reason, I'm really glad that we had already started to engage in these conversations, because I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to bring these kind of discussions and find the alternative model before anything is implemented, if implemented, in terms of these large amalgamated regions that they're looking to establish.
If there is a lease agreement, will this meet the category 3 requirement?
It would be written to meet the category 3 agreement. Well, let me think about that. Hold on. It's only a category 3 if we operate it. So it's basically it's a tenant lease. So, and we're within our rights to enter into lease agreements with other parties. So it doesn't even affect the whole category 3. It's no longer category 3 if it's owned and operated by somebody else. And just for the record, that's what most other conservation authorities have done, is they've moved to third-party operation with a lease agreement on their properties. That's generally what most CAs are doing these days. Any other questions?
That's it.
Okay, so we do have a couple of more questions just to know how we've done today, and if there's any areas outstanding that we didn't cover that people want addressed. So here's the first question. And you can use the slide bar on the side if you can't get up to number 10 there. Not that I'm suggesting it was a number 10, that was just, thank you. Okay, so we seem to have topped out at about 24% responding. So here are the results. And you can scroll down and hopefully see them. So I see that there are some areas that we haven't covered adequately for folks. So we have another question here that we're going to add in. Sorry. Just take us a moment here. There you go. So this one, you can just type in what areas you think we need to expand on, if not today, that, you know, in future or maybe on our website. Are you able to read out or? Oh, you're not?
I guess I have to wait till.
We'll give a bit longer on this because I'm assuming people are typing. Okay, it's been a minute and I don't see any additional ones, so if you want to share results. Okay, somebody has just offered the comment. It's not a matter of expanding on anything. It's just the fact that I'm not happy with our heritage possibly being moved, and we understand and respect that 100%. Who do you pursue as a possible lease candidate? So there are several groups in the community who are in discussions about whether or not they might want to assume ownership or management of the collection. So if you give us your contact information, and we'll provide for that at the end of this presentation, then we can link you up with people and we know who are working on that. How can general public participate in working group? So de facto by the name working group, these people are going to be meeting every other week until the spring, and it's going to be a very focused and facilitated session. We will probably be, during the course of that 6-month period, providing updates to our board, which will be made public. Once we have the names of the participants, we'll share those online, just so people know. And that way, if you know somebody who's sitting on the working group, you can follow up with them directly. I think we've got enough cross-section from the community and others that hopefully most of you will see somebody. At minimum, the chair of our museum committee, our museum advisory committee, is a board member and is a counselor from the town of Mississippi Mills, that's Bev Holmes. And so at minimum, you can always reach out to Bev. She is very much engaged on this and happy to, I'm sure, help link people in on the activities of the working group.
She made it into the meeting, so she's actually.
Oh, okay, and Bev is online today with us. Were there any other comments there?
No.
Okay, so thank you. And was that our last poll, or I think we had one
The
more?
last one is, this one.
Okay, so we have 2 more questions for you, and appreciate your support on helping us to better understand things. So when we issued the questionnaire online several weeks ago now, we had several people express interest in volunteering. And so we're wanting to start to refine that and get people's contact information if possible. If you're not volunteering today but would like to, we're more than happy to encourage people and take people on as volunteers. We have a great group of volunteers helping with the museum, many who have been associated with it for many, many years now. So this is lovely. Okay, I think we can end the poll there and share. So we have a fair number of people who are willing to help with grant writing, and that would be brilliant because, as you can see, it's the revenue that's the issue. Lovely to see potential museum guides because there's a possibility maybe we can look at retaining the current hours if we have enough people stepping up to assist with museum guides or so, and yeah, I mean, you don't need a whole gang of people to develop a website. So if there's a couple of people who are willing to help with that, that would be brilliant. Okay, so then our last question. If we can share. So bottom line is, if you want us to follow up with you, we need to have your contact information. We have a growing contact list for all, matters related to the museum and that property. So if you want us to add you to our contact list, please just give us your email. and we'll add you to our contact list. And that way, when we do updates to the board and the like, we'll be able to notify you and of both the publishing of the documents and invite, make you aware of the particulars of the actual meeting. Okay. Well, no, people are still adding in, so we'll just give a few more seconds here. I am going to provide an email address that if we accidentally cut you off, that you can send your email to, just to make sure that you get added to our contact list. Okay, so I think we're good. Oops. So we had 15 people added to our list, basically, so that's great. All right, so just to wrap up then, in terms of next steps. So if there are specific questions you didn't get to ask today or that you think of tonight or in the coming days, feel free to submit them. The email address is there. So we'll respond as able. I can't make you promises that we'll know all the answers, but please submit the questions and we'll do our best. We will be confirming the membership of the working group and posting that hopefully in the next couple of weeks, because we're looking to launch right into it in early January to have the initial meeting, and then, as I said, meeting every 2 weeks after that, and to schedule those meetings in the new year. So our hope is, as I said, by the end of May of next year, that we have a solution and that we can move forward with. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. And if there's any final questions that people have, happy to field them now, or like I said, just email them in after. Any further in the chat? Nope. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending today and staying on the call as long as you did. I wish you all a good evening. Take care.